Uh, my name is Simon. I'm from the UK Data Service. I work in the user support team at the service, where my main role is sort of helping users, particularly when they're using sensitive data or secure data. And really, I'm going to be talking to you today about the sorts of challenges that we foresee coming up, and by way of which we're going to introduce one of our data sets and talk about how we expect that's going to be used in the future. A little bit of a sales pitch, so about the UK Data Service. We're the UK's largest collection of social, economic and political data. We have around 7,500 data sets in our quantitative collection, and around 3,000 or so qualitative data sources. To pick up on something from Mark's presentation, we also have the Doomsday available in digital format if you wanted that. Just checked. And of these, we have a large number of what we call secure access data sets. We have around 150 of these. And these are data sets which contain sensitive variables that we can't be made available by downloading. And the way we make these available is we have a Citrix remote desktop system. We have to train users. They can't take things in and out of the environment, so it's all completely sealed in. But the majority of the data is available for registered users to download. It's approximately about 6,000 of those data sets are available just to download to registered users, and we have several hundred which are actually open access. We also provide various online tools. We have Nestar for looking at microdata. Some of our key surveys are, so you don't even need to download them. You can actually start doing some basic analyses through a website. We also have UKDS Stat, which is used if you're looking at international macro data. So if you want to look at things like life expectancy around the world or access to education, you can do all that through various data sources. And one of the things we archive is a lot of longitudinal studies. So these will be studies whereby the same groups of people are followed over several years. We have cohort studies like the National Child Development Study or BCS 1970, but we also have the BHPS, British Household Panel Survey, and the UK Household Longitudinal Study, which is most commonly known as Understanding Society. And that's the study I'm going to talk a little bit about, some of the things that we think about in the future. So Understanding Society has around 40,000 households have been involved in the study at some point, which is obviously quite big. There was the study beforehand, the British Household Panel Survey, which began in 1991. And Understanding Society is very much the successor to that. And actually what's really nice about Understanding Society is that some of the people who are part of the BHPS were then included in the Understanding Society from Wave 2, which means that you get about 25 years. They've actually just on Wave 9 of Understanding Society, so that will bring up to about 28 years of data for those same people. So you can really get a real sense of what's happened to them across that period. So the variables collected, they really focus on people's social and economic circumstances, their attitudes, lifestyle, health, relationships and employment. You can sort of chart them as they come in and out of employment, for example, about training, how they perform at school for the children, so on and so forth. So it's a very rich data source. And actually the secure access versions will then have very low levels of geography, other things like that, but we're able to link it to the National Pupil Database. So for those respondents who agreed to that, we're able to link to their pupil databases, so we actually see how they did at school, for example, and you can actually start researching quite detailed information about the school performances alongside the other variables that have been collected on their more social and economic situations. Included in Understanding Society as well is some biomarker research, so genetic information and various biomedical information has been collected as part of the study. And these can be accessed through the MetaDAC project. These are just some examples of some of the studies that have been done using Understanding Society. So, for example, in this one, they were looking at social interactions as a measure of mental health, and they were using Understanding Society and the genetic data that's been collected as part of that. Assortative mating, so they were interested in whether people are finding partners who are similar to themselves in a sort of genetic or socioeconomic way. Again, this one is a bit more straightforward perhaps, so they're looking at how things like depression and cardiovascular disease, they seem to be correlated in some ways, and so do they have similar sort of genetic basis. And again, another one, they were researching whether children with severe intellectual disabilities who'd been referred to clinics also shared similar genetic markers to similar people within the Understanding Society data. Now, really, this is to highlight one of the things that we foresee coming up as a big issue for archives going forward, and that's the linking of data together. So there's a statistic really that there was more data collected in 2017 than the previous 7,000 years, which I would guess we could probably go back further than that, maybe, because I can't imagine that there was that much collected prior to that period. We'll just say collected ever prior to that point, but it's only a very, very small fraction of that data that's ever really been used. It's I believe it's less than 1%, but about 0.5% of that data has ever been used for anything. Now, when we think of big data, it doesn't just mean big in terms of volume. It will also mean what's sometimes termed these 5 Vs, and they're so volume, variety, so we're having data coming in from lots of different sources. Velocity, we have data that's coming in very quickly, almost real time in some cases. Veracity, so we're thinking about biases or in terms of tidiness of the data, as it were. But also there should be value to it. It's not worth investing in a big sort of big data system if we're not actually gaining anything from doing so. So will surveys become bigger? Well, maybe. I mean, as I said, Understanding Society was about 40,000 households have been involved in some point. We could make it bigger, but really there's a limit to how much is gained just by adding more households. Obviously the cost goes up. You don't necessarily gain as much from the study if you double the number of households as you do the expense of that doubling. But what we really expect is that data is going to become bigger in terms of becoming wider. So this will be data that's able to link to more data sets. So in the same way that Understanding Society, we've been able to link it to administrative data in a national pupil database and biological data. What we expect to happen is that then you'll be able to link in many different data sources to make very wide data sets, not necessarily having, as I mentioned, not necessarily going to more households, but being able to have a richer picture of those same households. And this will be done through linking, as I say, to administrative data, to health data, and other new and novel forms of data. One of the projects that we're involved in, the Data Archive and the UK Data Service, is we're building a platform for analysis, doing analysis on smart meter energy data. So we're having data that's coming in, I think it's roughly every 30 seconds. Some of the test data we've got is, at the moment, 270 million observations. It's conceivable that you could perhaps use that data linked into households who are part of things like Understanding Society, assuming they've consented for that to be used. And then, again, depending on what you're trying to research, you could be using these new forms of data alongside the social data that's been collected as part of these big studies. Now, this obviously has benefits. You get a much richer data set, and it can reduce some of the costs because you're not having to recollect the same sort of social information or information which has been collected through administrative sources. And that can be really useful when you're thinking about linking data together. The problems, though, are that if you increase the number of variables included in the data set, we increase the risk of disclosure, so being able to identify people within a study. So we've got a little example of that. So it's a little bit far too small to read, but essentially we use an example in our training whereby we present a kind of very bog standard quantitative data set, and what you'll be able to spot, not in this example, but what you can spot there is that we have in that data someone who's a 16-year-old widow. And what we highlight this is a case that if you have some unusual variables, something that you wouldn't expect, it becomes much easier to track that person. And then what I did was we say, okay, well, actually, then I've got another random data set. And, oh, I've also got a 16-year-old widow. And now I found out that they've unfortunately also suffering with cancer. And then we've got some data from Twitter. This was kind of scraped, but then made to actually match the example. We've got someone who's tweeting about celebrating their 16th birthday, but also talking about tweeting about their cancer treatments and things like this. And so we start bringing together these data sets, suddenly we're getting a very, very rich picture of individual people. And actually we might be putting them at some sort of risk because we might be disclosing information about them that they didn't want people to know. And the issue is that once you start opening the data up to be linked in this way, you're using the data perhaps in ways that hadn't been predicted by the data owners. So they haven't perhaps thought about the ways that these data might be linked together. And so they haven't sort of planned ahead for that sort of linkage. So the way that we tend to mitigate risk, particularly with our most detailed data sets, is that we're controlling access to the data. So we're making sure that data is only accessed in a secure setting where researchers aren't able to do linking that hasn't been approved. This may not be possible all the time though, and actually there are other techniques that can be done afterwards. So for example, you could create a synthetic version of a data set, in which case you can use analysis, perform analysis on the synthetic version of the data, which will hopefully still tell the story of the original data, but it doesn't present quite the same risks. There's other techniques as well that we're exploring, including differential privacy, various other things along that line. And archives, we sort of see that their responsibility then becomes guiding researchers about how to overcome these problems. It's not just a case of archiving data or making the data available, but it's about guiding researchers to be able to use the data in the ways they want, but in a way which is safe, both for them and the respondents. And that's very much the way that we see the role of archives such as ourselves in the coming few years. So the hard thing really though is about predicting what comes up in the future, of course. Well, that's really annoying because actually I'd uploaded a load of data online in Stata format. That's okay because if people have any questions, they can always just email me or something like that, can't they? It doesn't really matter. Ultimately, oh well, that's really irritating. Yes, well, hopefully the people they'll be able to figure out what I did. I mean, I can't be bothered to answer any emails anymore, so yeah, hopefully that means the data isn't useless. So the other role of the archive then is about the continued usability of data. It's about ensuring that data formats are going to be supported in the future, or at least that the data is in a format which is supported. And it's about mediating the safe use of data. So I've mentioned about our secure access data. We have data which is a variety of levels of access, and that really reflects the sensitivity of the data. And we feel that you do need someone there to help guide those sorts of decisions about what data can be released in what ways. The OS digital repositories definition, they speak as well about having engaging with a community of researchers. It's not just a case of being essentially a shelf where you can access data. It's about engaging with the community and making sure that the tools and the data is in the way which makes sense to that community that you're engaging with. And it's providing support for researchers to maximize research potential. Through my role, we support researchers who are working with the data. So if they have data queries, if there's something about the data they don't understand. Of course, the documentation and things like this is provided with the data sets, but actually, particularly for new researchers, that may not always be that obvious, and it may be that they need people they can phone up or they can email to actually help them get the most out of the data that they're trying to use. So we like to think of this as an idea of expert data stewardship. At the archive, we currently archive I think it's around 20 terabytes of data, which sort of rough totting up, or if you looked at kind of a high street shop, you could probably buy 20 terabytes of hard drive for around £500-600, something like that. That's not really where the value of the archive comes from. It's not from just being a place you can store the data. It's about supporting researchers through the life of their research project and ensuring that the data remains usable. Okay, and actually that was what I wanted to say, and this is actually the end this time. It's no more news, breaking news. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. And let me be the first to congratulate you and welcome the very best on your coming retirement.
Yes.
Shocking news there. So I guess we've got time for any immediate questions for Chris, and then I think we'll open up to a kind of wider discussion, Q&A for the wider, for all the speakers. So we've got a couple of hands going up. I'm going to take the gentleman over here in the green shirt first, because Paul, frankly, we've heard from you already. So we'll start over here. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. That was really interesting. Angus White, DCC. I wondered if you could ever see your advice, including advising subjects to withdraw their consent because you've reassessed the risks of disclosure through linking data, and they've agreed to something they shouldn't really have agreed to. I mean, they have the right to this right to forget now, and would that be an extension of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not something that really ever particularly comes up for us, insofar as the decisions on what the data can be linked with is usually taken by the data owner, so the organisation that have collected it. I believe, or my understanding anyway, is not in that team as such, is that in terms of the right to forget, I think largely there can be exceptions made for kind of research reasons, and so that's correct, isn't it? Yeah. So in that respect, it's perhaps, as long as the people have consented to being part of the study, then that would probably be sufficient, I'd imagine.
Well, so there are derogations under data protection law for archives, and they do allow certain exceptions and exemptions in different types of use case. To me, it raises two questions, however. Firstly, that's written into the law, but not necessarily written into legal rulings yet. So actually, it might be written in, but it'll be for the judges to decide whether or not it can be applied in any given case. Oh, good. And secondly, it raises in my mind the question of what actually constitutes an archive, because the law is clear what archives are about. But if I may, I'm not sure research data services constitute archives in law. And that will be an interesting question when the judges do finally get there. I guess to demonstrate that your research data service is an archive, you'll need to demonstrate some appropriation of good practice, some method or measure of good practice that equates your research data service to an archive. But this is an open question, and it's a good one to raise. I mean, I'm not necessarily the best expert on that in the room, by the way. I've spent my time looking at the legislation, but not entirely sure I understand it. There might be others who are better placed to comment. Lady here.
Hi, I'm Cathy Pink from the University of Bath. You mentioned differential privacy, and it's not something I've come across before. Could you explain more about what that actually means in practice?
Well, it's I'll do my best. So essentially, it's just looking at. I'll try and explain it in a very simple way. You're looking at variables and trying to make a decision about how much each variable needs to be protected. It's my understanding of it. The way we're looking to implement it is in terms of, as the data's coming in, particularly with our DSAT project, which is the data from smart meters, what we're trying to do is identify the variables that we think are going to be most problematic as a way of leading to identification, and adding in some sort of noise around those variables in order to try and shield the users. But it's something that we're kind of developing at the moment rather than necessarily we've got in practice. Does that kind of clarify? Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you.
Paul Stokes, JISC. Similar question. Synthetic data set. I hadn't come across that one before. Could you expand a bit on that?
So, well, synthetic data is, well, without repeating, is data which is synthetic, but it's data which is being created from the original data, such that things like distributions and so forth are the same as the original data, but the actual rows of data are different. So it might be, for example, you could have fully synthetic data whereby it just if you did a mean of a variable, you get the same in both versions of the data, or it could be partially synthetic, where you're synthesizing the variables which you think are most at risk. So it might be that you have synthetic geographic information, for example. So it's rather than then making the original data available, you're making a data available which is not necessarily based or doesn't reflect exactly the original data, but it will reflect the coverage.
Based on that, then, I'm thinking that means you're anticipating what the researcher is going to want to know and understand about the data, and it could be that what you're doing there is then hasn't been anticipated, hasn't actually anticipated what the researcher really wants, and then destroys their research project. Yeah,
that is the risk really of, well, not the risk, but one of the things that has to be careful when there's the creation of synthetic data. So one of the things we're looking at doing is working in terms with the data owner to create partially synthetic versions of some of the secure access data sets to try and make them more widely available. The aim that we have with that is not necessarily that synthetic data will become what people use for their analysis, but it'd be what they use as a starting point. Is where they can develop their syntax. It will be representative of the original data, even if not exactly the same. And that way it can boost the usage of secure data, because things like data which you might have to travel to a safe room or something like that, not many people necessarily want to make that effort. If it's one safe room in the country, you may have to travel a long way to do that. But what you can do is create a synthetic version of the data which will give roughly the same kind of impression as the original set. People can develop their code, test it on that, then they only need to travel to look at the data once, and that way you can boost usage of secure data.
I did have one question.
Okay.
So just if I can come back also on the synthetic data, this introduces one of the key themes for us, I think. Simulated or synthetic data, the question arises as to whether or not it's worth keeping the synthetic data, or whether it's better to retain the algorithm from which the synthetic data was generated.
Yeah.
So when you've a huge data set synthesized, actually it might be simpler and easier to maintain the mechanism through which that data was synthesized. And that raises then the question of, what are we looking after here? Is this a research data service, or is it a research tools and applications service? And one can imagine, even if you did want to retain the synthesized data, you would still want to retain the documentation and the process of algorithm, whatever, as to how it was generated. So there's a certain amount of slippage here around this question of what research data constitutes. Just for discussion. Anyway, Paul, I interrupted your other thought, so.
The other thought was around one of my other duties, GDPR. And as you mentioned earlier on in responding, William, the derogation for scientific, historical, statistical and archiving. The advice we are giving out from JISC is do not rely on that derogation, especially until such time as it is tested in the courts. You must have a reasonable reason for doing using the data and making the connections and so on.
Yeah.
But I was interested, as one of the more mature players in this area, did you have to significantly change your processes because of the 25th of May, or did you have it all done anyway?
No, we did have to make some changes, but actually, by and large, we were already compliant with the new things. So, yeah, we didn't have to sort of, email everyone and ask for consent again. because actually, by and large, we were already adhering to the requirements. So I think we have one or two things still to finish off, but it's, yeah, we were basically already there. So.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how to make yourself unpopular. Okay, so we've got some time for a kind of broader Q&A for all of our speakers. We've had some Q&A associated with each of their presentations, but I feel the need to open it out slightly to that wider discussion just before we break for lunch. So, are there any kind of broader questions that you'd like to address to two or three speakers at once, or any reflections from the speakers themselves as to things that they wanted to connect with or wanted to add?
Neil Beagrie, Charles Beagrie again. This may be one. I think one of the speakers mentioned some of the problems with the user interface for preservation systems. I think Preservica was particularly mentioned. I was just wondering if any of the speakers could elaborate on the sort of difficulties that they've encountered and what they think those interfaces will need, how they will need to change in order for their staff to be able to use them.
Sure. Who'd like to pick that up? Emma, it was you that raised that as a topic. Could it possibly get you to pick it up? And there might be others in the room, by the way, who are in a position to comment as well. But Emma.
Yeah. What I need, and I know I keep saying I'm not a data preservation specialist, but neither are our researchers, is what we're looking for is basically a button to press and a lovely template. You say, okay, I want to keep this, and then it goes somewhere, and then voila, it is kept under whatever data preservation strategy we decide upon. But then it's also findable again. So as you say, it's no point just bunging it in somewhere if you can't reuse it or find it. And also the point about we don't necessarily need to download the data itself. It's actually just finding that it exists and basically what it's saying. Like Simon said about the synthetic data, you just need to have an idea. You don't necessarily need the absolute minuscule detail on it. So I think that's what will be really, really useful. So the front end is as user-friendly as possible, assuming that the user doesn't know about research data. And that way that will encourage normal researchers to deposit as well, whatever a normal researcher is in our institution. But a musician who's they know about digital technology, but they don't know about preservation, basically.
So yeah, I've still got my headset on that. I mean, one thing we're doing actually at the moment, I was tapping away on my last night working on this, is we're doing a report at the moment in the data service about how the front end of our system for how you locate data, which at the moment we call Discover. So what we've done is we've interviewed, we had a few sort of in-depth interviews. We've also done environmental scans. We've had user surveys, and we're sort of drawing all that in together at the moment about how we can redesign the system to make it more user-friendly. Because we were concerned that actually at the moment it's a bit of being hit with a wall of information, and it's got a bit of a challenge really for users. So we're doing that in terms of the data discovery side. In terms of depositing data, obviously slightly different in that we have ingest team which process data as it comes in. But we're also building a new tool for doing quality analysis, essentially, of data which is self-uploaded onto our system. So we have Reshare, which enables, say, individual researchers to upload data to our archive. We're building a tool which will be hopefully very simple to run, that they can then run on their data, and it will give them sort of like a health check of the data. So it's looking for data quality issues and things like that. And what we're hoping through that is that actually more people will have more confidence to upload data to make it available. One of the things that when we've spoken to users is that researchers are sometimes concerned that if they put their data up on a place where it can be seen, they're sort of almost opening themselves up for criticism about the way that it's been collected or the way that it's been archived. And so we're hoping that something like that, which the moment it's still sort of very much an alpha, but very simple sort of dashboard where you click on some icons, run some tools, and it gives you a report on what the issues might be with your data, so you can help guide users in that way. So that's what we're doing at the moment to try and make that better.
I'm almost tempted. Sarah, I'm looking at you for a moment because I know. So it seems to me there are two answers to the question. One is to make the interface simpler, to have a really clever interface, or have really clever depositors. And I know that you've been doing a little work on training and the challenges faced by researchers at your institution. Can I bring you into that discussion a little bit? What if we can't maybe phrase that differently, what if we can't make the interfaces simpler? Do we have any prospect of making the depositors cleverer?
I might also put this to John as well because he deals a lot with the researchers. But from my side of things, I would say we've made it as simple as possible for depositing, and you make as much optional, and they'll take that option to not give information that might be crucial down the track. So it might be a chance that you need to really educate them and work with them from the beginning so that they have a good idea of what kind of metadata is needed to get the best out of it. I can make it as simple as possible, but I still think it might never be simple enough. But I'll leave that also to John to maybe add to that.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, hi, it's John Saffel here again. Yes, I mean, one of the things we're working at Oxford is on training for researchers in research data management, but also training for librarians and those who are involved in research support. So whilst on the one hand we're kind of pushing on trying to educate and raise awareness of researchers and what's involved in research data management, so they feel they're in control and can kind of go to UKDS and work through reshare, self-archive. But at the same time acknowledge the fact that there's always going to be a place for someone to actually give support to researchers when they're doing this, or to practitioners, however they define themselves. I think that's actually probably one of the big things which, again, are going to be changing in the future, the need for more and more institutional support. I mean, actually, having once worked at UK Data Archive, as it was then, or UK Data Service, and now working within libraries, I can kind of see how that kind of shift has been happening with academic institutions thinking about taking a lead. And I think it's just another example of all the different kind of stakeholders in this whole process, seeing where there are gaps. And I think that's one of the places where institutions, universities, in particular, sometimes university libraries or sometimes university research services are looking to kind of fill this gap in providing support. But again, the thing we're trying to push all the time to try and get engagement is this notion that it's not about compliance on the part of researchers, it's about doing something which actually is good for them, good for the process of scholarly activity and research, but also something where they need to be aware of it, but they also need to be aware of the local infrastructure for support, who's there to help them do all this. Okay.
I don't know if we're getting a sensible answer to your original question, Neil.
I'm sorry. I guess you can design it for staff, the repository staff, but the repository staff might want it to be a user, and that's a big jump to then push it, if you like, up the deposit chain, or the proving the input and the metadata up to the researcher to deposit it.
It seems to me it's another version of that parsimonious preservation question as well, isn't it? Where does the effort reside?
Yes, and where's the cost come from doing that?
Exactly, the cost, therefore.
If it's on the researcher, they are going to do the things which are mandatory, basically. And if you've got a lot of desirable fields, which ideally you'd like filled out, they may be vacant. Yeah.
So Sarah Mason, Bodleian Libraries again. I'll add to what Neil said actually about kind of, is it the staff or is it the user? We might make templates so the user deposits. There still needs to be a staff member and some kind of manual process after that where then they quality check and go back to the depositor and say, actually, we need more. And that's kind of, I guess, the kind of cog in the system there that's difficult. We can't make it 100% automatic, but we at least are getting the data to be deposited, and then we've got something we can do with it. And then we can go back to them and get more and make it a richer, kind of a richer metadata to go with the data set. But again, it's never just a click and it's ready to go. There's always some kind of human interaction that has to happen in that space.
suppose the other thing to pick up is what's in it for the depositor. And it comes back to then to things like reporting, being able to give them stats, making sure there's access, things that they can use when it comes to ref, all the numbers, all those sort of things.
Paul Stokes again. I'm going to be slightly controversial here. I'm going to say that is a current problem, not a future problem. If what we should be doing now is educating the future researchers into what and how and why, so it's just part of their normal workflow. And within 5-10 years, touch wood, lots of wood here, that's not going to be a problem we're going to be facing. But I do agree about the interfaces. Some of them are actually well, I can't say that, but they are terrible.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you to all of our speakers. Listen, we've got to lunchtime now, so I guess we should take a pause. Let's start though by thanking our speakers from this morning. It's been a really thought-provoking session, so thank you all very much.